My name is David. I'm 63 years old, and for the last 3 decades, my life has been defined by two things: the steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in my hallway and the unwavering certainty that family comes first. I live in a house that feels slightly too big for one person now, a colonial style built with creaky floorboards and a kitchen that smells perpetually of dried sage and old timber. It's the house where I raised my son. It's the house where I taught him how to tie a tie, how to shave without cutting his jawline, and most importantly, how to roast a turkey until the skin was crisp and gold like autumn leaves. I suppose that's why the silence hurts as much as it does now. It's not just an absence of noise, it's a presence in itself. It sits heavy on my chest, pressing down a little harder every morning when I wake up and realize the phone isn't going to ring. To understand why I'm sitting here in the dark, looking at a pantry full of unused ingredients, you have to understand the relationship I had with my son. We were close, not just father and son close, but friends. After his mother passed when he was 14, it was just the two of us against the world. We navigated the rocky waters of his teenage years together. I sat up with him when he had his heart broken by his high school sweetheart, handing him tissues and mugs of hot chocolate, telling him that pain was just the price of being alive. I paid for his college by working double shifts at the plant, ruining my back but never complaining because seeing him walk across that stage was the only payment I ever needed. Then came Emily. I want to be fair. When my son first introduced me to Emily 5 years ago, I was charmed. She was sharp, ambitious, and carried herself with a poise that made her seem older than she was. She had these piercing blue eyes that seemed to analyze everything they looked at, assessing value and utility. At the time, I thought she was looking at my son with love. Now, looking back through the lens of hindsight, I wonder if she was looking at him like a fixer-upper project, something to be renovated and flipped. The changes were subtle at first. That's how it always happens, isn't it? It's never an explosion, it's erosion. It's the slow drip of water on a stone. It started with the Sunday dinners. For years, my son would come over every Sunday at 5 o'clock. I'd make a pot roast or a lasagna and we'd watch the game or just talk about his week at the firm. A few months into his relationship with Emily, the visits became irregular. "Emily's really tired, Dad," my son would say, his voice sounding a little thin over the phone. "She had a hard week. We're just going to order ins." "Of course," I'd say, pushing down the disappointment. "Tell her I hope she feels better." Then it was the decor. My son had an apartment filled with things he loved: vintage movie posters, a comfortable, albeit ugly, leather recliner I'd given him, and photos of us on our fishing trips. When they moved in together, those things vanished. I visited their new townhouse a year later and felt like I had walked into a dentist's waiting room. Everything was beige, white, or gray. There were no photos of us, no clutter, no life, just sleek, cold lines and Emily standing in the kitchen, wiping down a spotless counter with a ferocity that made me nervous. "It's beautiful, isn't it, David?" Emily had asked me, not looking up from the marble surface. She never called me Dad or Mr. Henderson, just David. It always sounded a bit flat coming from her, devoid of warmth. "It's very clean," I had replied. "We prefer a minimalist aesthetic," she said, finally locking eyes with me. There was something in her expression, a challenge. Clutter creates a cluttered mind. "We want to focus on our future, not the past." I didn't realize then that I was part of the clutter she intended to clear out. The real friction began around the wedding planning, but I kept my mouth shut. I paid for the rehearsal dinner, a lavish affair at a downtown bistro that cost more than my first car. I sat in the corner nursing a scotch, watching my son laugh nervously as Emily directed the photographer, moving people around like chess pieces. She moved my son's hand from his pocket to her waist. She tilted his chin up. She adjusted his tie. She was sculpting him. I walked over to congratulate them during a lull. "You look beautiful, Emily," I said, offering a smile. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my suit. It was a good suit, tailored, but perhaps a few years out of style. "Thanks, David. Could you do me a favor? When the photographer comes back around, could you maybe stand near the bar? The lighting is better for the group shots over by the window, and we really want to focus on the bridal party." It took me a moment to process what she was saying. She didn't want me in the candid shots. She wanted me in the background, out of focus. Sure, I said, my voice catching in my throat. Whatever you need. My son saw it, I know he did. He looked at me, then at her, and for a second I saw a flicker of the boy I raised, the boy who would have defended me. But then Emily placed a manicured hand on his chest, whispering something in his ear that made him nod slowly, his eyes glazing over. He turned his back to me. That was the moment I knew I was losing him, but I never expected to be completely erased. Fast forward to this past November. Thanksgiving has always been our holiday. Christmas was chaotic, birthdays were fleeting, but Thanksgiving was sacred. It was the one day where the menu never changed, the timeline never wavered, and the door was always open. Since my wife passed, I took over the cooking completely. I spent days prepping. I made a cranberry sauce from scratch with orange zest and port wine. I brined the turkey for 48 hours. I made the stuffing with homemade cornbread. 2 weeks before the holiday, I was at the grocery store, standing in the baking aisle, debating between two brands of pumpkin puree. I was feeling good. My back wasn't hurting too much, and I had just found a new recipe for glazed carrots I knew my son would love. I had already set the table at home, polishing the good silver, ironing the tablecloth that my grandmother had embroidered. I reached for my phone to call my son just to check if Emily had any new dietary restrictions I needed to know about. She had gone gluten-free last year, then keto the month after. I wanted to be accommodating. I wanted her to feel welcome, thinking that maybe if I tried harder, the ice between us would thaw. I dialed his number. It rang 4 times before he picked up. "Hey, Dad," he said. Immediately my stomach dropped. I know my son's voice better than I know my own. I know the pitch of his excitement, the timbre of his anger, and the hollow, breathless tone of his guilt. This was the guilt. "Hey, kiddo," I said, trying to keep my voice light, pretending I didn't hear the hesitation. "I'm at the store. Just wanted to double-check on the menu. Is Emily still doing the no-dairy thing, or can I use real butter in the mashed potatoes this year?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear background noise, the hum of a television, the clinking of glass. Then I heard Emily's voice, muffled as if she was speaking from across the room. "Tell him now," she said. It wasn't a suggestion, it was in command. "Dad," my son said, clearing his throat. "Actually, that's what I needed to talk to you about." I gripped the handle of the shopping cart, my knuckles turning white. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store suddenly felt very bright, humming with a low-frequency buzz that made my teeth ache. "What is it? Is everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine," he said, rushing the words. "It's just, plans are changing a little bit this year." "Changing?" I asked. "Changing how? You know I've already got the turkey ordered. It's an 18-pounder. I can pick it up on Tuesday." "Right, yeah," he sounded miserable. "The thing is, Dad, Emily and we've been talking, and she's been really stressed lately. Work has been crazy for her, and she's just been feeling very overwhelmed." "I understand that," I said, confused. "That's why you come to my house. I do the cooking. I do the cleaning. You two just have to show up, eat, and relax. I'll even pack you leftovers so she doesn't have to cook on Friday." "It's not about the cooking," my son said. He let out a sigh, a sharp exhale of breath that sounded like it was being forced out of him. "Look, Emily feels that. She feels that Thanksgiving should be a more intimate affair this year. She wants to start some new traditions." "New traditions?" I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Okay, we can do new traditions. Does she want to play games? Does she want to watch a specific parade? I'm flexible, son, you know that." "No, Dad, you're not listening." His voice snapped a little defensive now. He was cornered, and like any animal, he was lashing out to escape the discomfort of the moment. "She wants it to be just her family." The air left my lungs. It felt as if someone had punched me in the solar plexus. I stood there staring at a can of pumpkin puree, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. "Her family," I whispered, "but her parents live in Ohio. They're flying in." "Yes," my son said, "they're coming in on Wednesday, staying at the house." "Okay," I said, my mind racing, trying to find a solution, trying to find where I fit into this puzzle. "That's fine. The table extends, I have the extra leaves, I have plenty of chairs. The more the merrier, right? I've never met them, it would be a great opportunity to. Dad, stop. The silence that followed was deafening. She doesn't want you there, he said. The words hung in the air, brutal and naked. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart started to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, erratic rhythm. She what? She says it's too much pressure, my son continued, and now I could hear the rehearsal in his voice. These weren't his words, they were hers, fed to him line by line until he memorized them. She says that when you're around, she feels judged. She feels like she has to perform, and her parents, they're very particular. She thinks that having two sets of parents there would just be too chaotic. She wants to focus on them this year. She says she hasn't seen them in 6 months. I haven't seen you in 3 weeks, I said, my voice trembling. I'm your father. I know, Dad, I know. He sounded pained, but not pained enough to change it. But you have to understand, I have to live with her. I have to make this work. She's been crying about it all week, saying how much she needs this time with just her folks. She says she says you can be a little overbearing with the nostalgia. Overbearing with the nostalgia. Is that what they call love now? Is remembering the past, cherishing the memories of the people we've lost, considered a flaw? So, I said, struggling to keep my composure in the middle of the baking aisle. So what am I supposed to do? It's Thanksgiving. Am I supposed to sit here alone? It's just 1 year, Dad, he pleaded. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Please, don't guilt-trip me. I'm not guilt-tripping you, I said, though I felt a surge of anger rising, hot and sharp. I am stating a fact. You are asking me to spend the biggest family holiday of the year alone in an empty house, so your wife can have a curated experience with her parents. Don't call it that, he snapped. What else is it? I demanded. I could hear people passing by me, their carts rattling, but I didn't care. Does she know you're telling me not to come? Oh, she's right here, Dad. I froze. Put her on, I said. Dad, I don't think. Put hers on. There was a shuffling sound, the muffled friction of a hand passing over a microphone. Then her voice, cool, calm, utterly detached. Hello, David. Emily, I said, my son tells me I'm not welcome at Thanksgiving. Oh, David, don't be dramatic, she said, letting out a small, condescending laugh. It was a sound that made my skin crawl. Nobody is saying you're not welcome in general. We're just saying that this specific event is going to be for my side of the family. My mother has been going through a lot lately with her hip surgery, and she needs a calm environment. We just think it would be best if we kept the circle small. I'm one person, I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. I'm quiet, I cook, I clean up, I wouldn't be a burden. It's not about being a burden, she said, her tone hardening. It's about the dynamic. You and my son have this intense bond. You tell inside jokes. You bring up old stories. It makes other people feel excluded. It makes me feel excluded in my own home. My parents don't know your history. It creates an awkward atmosphere. We just want a fresh slate this year. Surely a grown man can handle one evening by himself. The cruelty of it took my breath away. She was weaponizing my closeness with my son against me. She was framing my love as a social faux pas. He's my son, Emily, I said quietly. He's my husband, David, she countered instantly, her voice like steel. And right now he agrees with me. We need boundaries. You've been leaning on him too hard since your wife died. It's not healthy. You need to find your own life. I stood there stunned. My wife, she brought up Sarah. She used my dead wife as a bargaining chip to justify kicking me to the curb. Let me speak to him, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He's busy prepping the guest room, she lied. I knew he was standing right there. I could hear his breathing. Look, David, we'll come by the weekend after. We can do a quick lunch or something, but Thursday is closed. Please respect our privacy. Click, the line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the screen. The call had lasted 6 minutes, 6 minutes to undo 30 years of devotion, 6 minutes to dismantle the tradition that had held me together through the darkest years of my life. I looked down at the cart, the pumpkin puree, the cinnamon, the heavy cream. It all looked ridiculous now, foolish. The props of an old man playing a role that had been written out of the script. I left the cart there in the middle of the aisle. I didn't have the energy to put the items back. I just walked out of the store, the automatic doors sliding open into the cold November rain. I got into my truck, sat in the driver's seat, and watched the raindrops race down the windshield, blurring the world outside until it was just a gray, indistinct mess. I drove home in silence. When I walked into my house, the quiet hit me harder than it ever had before. It wasn't peaceful, it was predatory. The dining room table was set. The napkins were folded into swans, a trick Sarah had taught me. The crystal glasses sparkled in the dim light. I sat down at the head of the table, my spot. I looked at the empty chair to my right where my son should be. I looked at the empty chair across from me where Emily would have sat picking at her food and judging the decor. I realized then that this wasn't just about Thanksgiving. This was a test. Emily was seeing how far she could push. She was marking her territory, pissing on the boundaries of my relationship with my son to see if the foundation would crumble. And it had. My son had crumbled. He had chosen the path of least resistance. He had chosen to let his father sit alone in the dark rather than have a difficult conversation with his wife. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and salty. I wiped it away angrily. Healthy boundaries, I muttered to the empty room, leaning too hard. The anger started to simmer then. It wasn't the explosive rage of youth. It was something colder, denser. It was the anger of a man who has given everything and received a slap in the face in return. I thought about the money I spent on their wedding. I thought about the down payment I helped them with for their townhouse, money I had pulled from my retirement savings because Emily really needs the second bathroom. I thought about the hours I spent fixing the transmission on my son's car last winter so he wouldn't have to take out a loan. I had made myself a rug for them to walk on, hoping it would keep them close. But if you make yourself a rug, you can't be surprised when people wipe their dirty feet on you. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I picked up the phone again. I wasn't going to call them back. Begging was beneath me. If they wanted silence, I would give them silence. But silence works two ways. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Thanksgiving was in 3 days. They expected me to sit here, sad and compliant, waiting for their pity lunch the following weekend. They expected me to be the good old dad who swallows his pride to keep the peace. But as I looked around the kitchen my wife and I had built, the kitchen where I taught my son to be a man, something shifted in me. The sadness began to calcify into resolve. If Emily wanted to play games with family, she should have checked the roster first. She treated me like a senile old dependent, someone without agency or options. She forgot that before I was a lonely widower, I was a man who ran a factory floor of 200 workers. She forgot that I was the one who balanced the books, who navigated the strikes, who made the hard calls when no one else would. I wasn't just going to sit here and eat a frozen dinner while they toasted to their fresh slate. I went to the fridge and opened a bottle of beer. I took a long drink, the cold liquid shocking my system. My heart rate slowed. The ringing in my ears faded, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. My son wanted to exclude me. Fine. He wanted to pretend I didn't exist for the sake of his wife's comfort. Fine. I walked over to the sideboard where I kept the family photo albums. I opened the one from my son's childhood. There he was, 5 years old, holding up a fish he'd caught, smiling that gap-toothed smile. I loved him. God, I loved him. But sometimes love means teaching a hard lesson. And sometimes the student has to feel the sting of the ruler to understand the gravity of the mistake. I closed the album with a snap. They wanted a Thanksgiving without me. They wanted to cut me out. Well, if you cut off a limb, you have to be prepared for the phantom pain. And you have to be prepared for the fact that once it's gone, you can't just stitch it back on whenever it's convenient for you. I wasn't going to call them. I wasn't going to text. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for, total, absolute absence, but I wasn't going to spend the day moping. I picked up the phone, but this time I dialed a different number. A number I hadn't called in a long time. My brother, who lived 3 states away in Florida. He had been asking me to come down and fish the Keys for years. I always said no because I didn't want to leave my son for the holidays. Hello, my brother's voice cracked over the line. Mark, I said, is that offer to come down still open? David, he sounded surprised. Yeah, of course, when were you thinking? Thursday, I said. I want to be on a boat on Thursday. Thursday, but what about the kid? What about Thanksgiving? The kid has his own traditions now, I said, my voice steady, and I have mine. I looked at the turkey pan sitting on the counter. I'm booking a flight tonight, I told him, and Mark. Oh yeah. Don't tell anyone I'm coming. I want to disappear for a while. As I hung up, I looked at the table one last time. Then methodically, I began to clear it. I put the silver away. I folded the napkins. I stripped the table until it was bare wood. They wanted me gone. They were about to find out just how empty the world feels when the person who has carried you your whole life finally decides to put you down. I walked up the stairs to the master bedroom, the wooden steps creaking under my weight in a rhythm I had known for 30 years. Each creak sounded like a condemnation. The house was too big. It was built for a family, for a wife who was gone, and for a son who had decided he didn't need me anymore. I pulled my old leather duffel bag out of the closet. It smelled like cedar and disuse. As I unzipped it, the sound tore through the silence of the room, sharp and angry. I started throwing clothes in without folding them. A couple of polo shirts, my fishing shorts, the blood pressure medication I was supposed to take with food. My hands were shaking, not from age and not from cold. They were shaking from a rage so potent it felt like I had swallowed a cup of hot coals. I needed to get out of this house because everywhere I looked, I saw the ghosts of the favors I had done for them. The bathroom I retiled when Emily said the beige was depressing. The nursery I painted 3 coats of seafoam mist because Emily decided baby blue was too gender normative. I saw the checkbook in the top drawer where I had written the down payment for their starter home. A gift, not a loan, because I wanted my son to have an easier start than I did. And this is how they repaid me. I sat on the edge of the bed, the half-packed bag beside me, and I let the memory of Tuesday night wash over me again. I needed to feel it. I needed to remember every single word so I wouldn't turn that car around on the way to the airport. It had been raining, a cold, miserable November sleet. I had been in the garage sharpening my chisels when I heard their car pull up. I was happy. I was pathetic, really. I remember wiping the grease off my hands with a rag, checking my reflection in the dark window to make sure I looked presentable. I thought they were coming to finalize the menu. I had already bought the 20-pound turkey. It was thawing in the fridge downstairs right now, a 20-pound monument to my own stupidity. When I walked into the kitchen, they were already there. They had let themselves in. My son was leaning against the counter, looking everywhere except at me. He was studying the grain of the granite countertops like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. Emily was sitting at the table. She didn't stand up when I entered. She just wrapped her hands tighter around the mug of coffee she'd poured for herself. "Hey, Dad," my son said. His voice was thin, brittle. "Hey, sport," I said. I looked at Emily. "Emily, good to see you. I was just thinking about the stuffing. Mom's recipe calls for sausage, but I know you're trying to cut back on red meat, so I found a poultry substitute that." "David," Emily interrupted. She didn't call me Dad anymore. She hadn't for a year. "We need to talk about Thursday." I stopped. I put the rag down on the counter. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt heavy, charged with static. "Okay, what about it? Do we need to move the time back? I can have the bird ready whenever." And Emily took a sip of coffee. She grimaced as if it wasn't to her liking. "Actually, it's about the guest list." "Guest list?" I laughed, a nervous, confused sound. "It's Thanksgiving, Emily, it's just us. Unless you invited your folks, you know they're always welcome. I can pull the extra leaf out of the table." She sighed. It was a long, performative exhale, the kind you use when dealing with a slow child. She looked at my son. "Honey, do you want to explain or should I?" My son shifted his weight. He looked at his boots. "Emily's parents are coming down from Connecticut," he mumbled. "Great," I said, trying to salvage the mood. "Like I said, the more the merrier. I'll get more potatoes." "No, David," Emily said. Her voice was sharp now. "That's not it." She finally looked me in the eye. Her eyes were a pale, watery blue, and there was absolutely no warmth in them. There was only calculation. My parents, she began, enunciating every syllable, are particular. They have a certain way of doing things, a certain aesthetic they expect for the holidays. It's been a very stressful year for me, David. I've been working so hard on my brand, on my image. This dinner is important to me. I need it to be perfect. I don't understand, I said. My heart was starting to thump against my ribs, a slow, heavy drumbeat. I can help make it perfect. I'll polish the silver. David, please listen, she said, cutting me off with a raised hand. Her nails were manicured, sharp little daggers. My father can be critical. He and my mother, they're very traditional, very formal. She paused, looking me up and down. I was wearing my flannel shirt and work jeans. I had sawdust in my hair. We just think, she continued, her voice dropping to a faux sympathetic whisper, that you wouldn't be comfortable. The conversation, the atmosphere, it's going to be very stiff, very highbrow. You'd probably be bored to tears. You'd be sitting there feeling out of place, and that would just make everyone tense, especially me. I stared at her. The room seemed to tilt slightly to the left. Are you uninviting me? We're not uninviting you, she said quickly, as if the word burnt her tongue. We're just setting a boundary. We're prioritizing the nuclear family dynamic for this specific event. My parents are paying for the remodel of our master bath, David. I have to play the game with them, and having you there, it changes the dynamic. It complicates things. I looked at my son. I begged him with my eyes to say something, to be the man I raised. To say, no, Emily, he's my father and he eats with us. Son, I asked, my voice cracked. He finally looked up, but his eyes were wet and terrified. He was scared of her. I realized it then. He was terrified of losing her, terrified of her temper, terrified of the withdrawal of her affection. Dad, he whispered, it's just 1 year, maybe we can do Christmas, or the day after. You can come by on Friday and pick up leftovers. Pick up leftovers like a stray dog. You want me to come by for scraps? I asked. I felt cold. My fingertips were numb. It's not like that, Emily snapped. She was losing her patience. She stood up, smoothing down her skirt. God, why do you have to make everything so dramatic? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You take everything so personally. It's just a dinner, David. It's not a verdict on your character. My parents are difficult people. I am trying to protect you from them, and quite frankly, I am trying to protect my own sanity. She walked over to the sink and dumped the rest of my coffee, down the drain. We just want a nice, elegant, quiet evening, she said, turning her back to me. Without any friction, without any old war stories from the factory, without you correcting my son on how to carve the turkey. I taught him how to carve, I said quietly. Well, he's a grown man now, Emily said, spinning around. He doesn't need a teacher, he needs a partner. And I need a husband who supports me, not a daddy's boy who runs to you every time a faucet leaks. She checked her watch. We have to go, we have a reservation for brunch. She grabbed her purse. My son lingered for a second. He reached out as if to touch my shoulder, but I took a half step back. I couldn't bear his touch, not right then. Dad, I'll call you, he said. Don't, I had said. That was the last word I spoke to them. Just go. I sat on the bed in the present day, staring at the open duffel bag. The memory burned. It wasn't just the exclusion, it was the reason. I wasn't good enough. I was the rough, blue-collar father who paid the bills but didn't fit the aesthetic. I was the ATM machine that had served its purpose and was now being unplugged because it clashed with the decor. Leftovers, I whispered to the empty room. I stood up and walked to the bathroom to grab my toiletries. I looked in the mirror. I saw the lines on my face. I saw the gray in my beard. I looked like a man who had worked hard every single day of his life. I looked like a man who had sacrificed his back, his knees, and his hearing to make sure that boy had a college education. And Emily looked at me and saw an embarrassment. I grabbed my toothbrush and threw it into the kit. The most painful part wasn't even Emily's cruelty, it was my son's silence. He stood there and let her dismantle me. He let her treat me like a hired hand she was firing. He knew that this was the first Thanksgiving without his mother. He knew how quiet this house got. He knew that for the last 10 months I had been holding onto the idea of this holiday like a lifeline, and he cut the rope. I zipped the bag shut. The sound was final. I wasn't going to be there on Friday for leftovers. I wasn't going to be there for Christmas either. If I was friction, then I would remove the friction entirely. I walked downstairs carrying the bag. I went into the kitchen one last time. The 20-pound turkey was still sitting in the roasting pan on the counter wrapped in plastic. It looked ridiculous. I grabbed a sticky note and a pen from the drawer. My hand hovered over the paper. I wanted to write a manifesto. I wanted to write a breakdown of every dollar I had given them, every hour of labor I had poured into their house. I wanted to scream in ink, but I knew Emily. She would read a long, angry letter and roll her eyes. She would show it to my son and say, "*C, he's unstable. We made the right choice." No, I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of my anger. I would give her something much worse. I would give her my silence. I put the pen down without writing a word. I went to the fridge. I took out the Tupperware containers I had prepped yesterday, the cranberry sauce made from scratch, the green beans I had blanched. I walked over to the trash can and scraped them out. The sound of the food hitting the plastic liner was wet and sickening. I washed the containers. I dried them. I put them away. I looked at the turkey again. I couldn't throw that away. It was a waste of good food, and my Depression-era mother would have haunted me. I picked up the heavy pan and walked out the back door. The neighbor's dog, a golden retriever named Buster, was usually in the yard. I walked to the fence. "Buster." I called out softly. The dog came trotting over, tail wagging, sniffing the air. "Happy Thanksgiving, buddy," I said. I hoisted the turkey over the fence. It landed with a thud in the grass. Buster looked at me, then at the bird, his eyes wide with disbelief. He didn't wait for a second invitation. I went back inside and locked the back door. I checked the thermostat. I turned it down to 55 degrees. I unplugged the coffee maker. I unplugged the toaster. I went room by room, turning off every single light, plunging the house into gray afternoon shadows. When I got to the front hall, I put on my coat. It was a heavy wool coat, one I'd had for years. It felt like armor. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I had 3 missed texts from my son. "Dad, are you okay?" "Dad, please pick up." "Emily feels bad. We want to know if you want to come for dessert." "On dessert?" After the important people had left, after the aesthetic had been preserved, I could come in through the back door and eat pie in the kitchen while they debriefed on how successful the evening was. I stared at the screen. The urge to reply was strong. The urge to say "go to hell" was overwhelming. But I remembered the look in Emily's eyes. She wanted a reaction. She wanted to be the victim of my drama. I went to the settings menu. I scrolled down to notifications. I turned off everything. Then I powered the phone down completely. The screen went black, reflecting my own face back at me. I picked up the duffel bag. I opened the front door. The wind was biting, carrying the smell of dead leaves and coming snow. It was the kind of weather that made your bones ache, but for the first time in days, I didn't feel the cold. I felt a strange, vibrating heat in the center of my chest. I locked the door behind me. I didn't put the key under the mat where I usually did for my son in case he needed to borrow tools. I put the key in my pocket. I walked to my truck, threw the bag in the passenger seat, and climbed in. The engine roared to life, a rough, reliable sound. As I backed out of the driveway, I looked at the house one last time. It looked abandoned. Dark windows, no wreath on the door, no smoke from the chimney. "Enjoy your aesthetic, Emily," I said aloud. My voice sounded loud in the cab of the truck. I put the truck in drive and didn't look back. I had a 2-hour drive to the airport and then a flight to a place where the sun actually shone. But as I merged onto the highway, my mind wasn't on the fishing. It was on the future. Because I knew something Emily didn't. I knew something my son had forgotten. They thought they were just cutting out an old man for one dinner. They thought I was static. They thought I would just be there, paused in time, waiting for them to press play again when they needed something fixed or paid for. They didn't realize that the machinery of this family didn't run on their schedule. It ran on my support, and I had just pulled the kill switch. I turned on the radio, classic rock. I turned it up loud, drowning out the quiet, drowning out the hurt. The betrayal was done. The planning was over. Now they were just living on borrowed time before the lights went out in their own lives. And I intended to be very, very far away when the darkness finally hit them. I pressed my foot down on the gas. The truck surged forward. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was driving toward something instead of just waiting to be parked. I drove for 3 hours. The highway was a ribbon of gray concrete cutting through the dying autumn landscape, eventually giving way to the sterile, fluorescent labyrinth of the airport. I left my truck in long-term parking, a place that smelled of gasoline and exhaust, a scent that felt like freedom. I didn't turn my phone back on. Not in the shuttle, not at the security checkpoint, and not while I sat at the gate waiting for the red-eye to Florida. I watched the people around me, families arguing over carry-on bags, young couples holding hands, businessmen barking into headsets. They all looked so tethered. They were bound by invisible strings of obligation and expectation. For the first time in 30 years since my wife passed and I took on the role of both mother and father to my son, I felt untethered. But being untethered can be terrifying. It feels like falling. I landed in Florida just as the sun was bleeding orange over the Atlantic. The humidity hit me the moment I stepped out of the terminal, a thick, warm blanket that instantly loosened the knot of tension between my shoulder blades. I picked up the rental car, a nondescript sedan that didn't rattle or smell like old work boots, and drove to the condo I'd bought 5 years ago. Emily called this place the retirement home. She said it with a curl of her lip, as if preparing for your own twilight years was something distasteful. She had laughed when I bought it, telling my son it was a waste of inheritance money. She didn't know the deed was in a trust. She didn't know a lot of things. I entered the condo. The air was stale, preserved, quiet. I opened the sliding glass doors to the balcony, letting the roar of the ocean wash out the silence of my own thoughts. I made a pot of coffee, the dark roast bitter and grounding. Then I sat at the glass dining table. I didn't look at the ocean. I opened my laptop. It was time to look at the ledger. For years, I had treated my finances with my son and Emily like a leaky faucet I was too tired to fix. A few hundred here for a car repair my son couldn't afford. A few thousand there for a business opportunity Emily wanted to pursue, her boutique candle making, her life coaching certification, the endless parade of hobbies that required capital but yielded no profit. It had become background noise. I was the safety net, woven so tight they forgot they were walking on a high wire. I pulled up the bank statements. I pulled up the credit card accounts. I pulled up the property deeds. The screen glowed blue in the dim morning light, illuminating the truth I had chosen to ignore. Line item, Lexus lease payment, $650. Line item, Grandview Country Club dues, $400. Line item, Platinum Card balance payoff, $3,240. My heart began to hammer, not with panic but with a cold, rhythmic anger. It was a physical sensation like swallowing ice. I wasn't just a father to them, I was a host, and they were the parasites. I opened a new document. I named it simply The Withdrawal. I started with the house. My son and Emily lived in a 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs. It was a beautiful house. The kind of house you see in magazines. The kind of house Emily needed to maintain her image of the perfect, affluent mother, but they didn't own it. I did. 7 years ago when they got married, they couldn't qualify for a mortgage. Emily had student debt, my son had a credit score that had been bruised by youthful stupidity, so I bought the house. I put it in my name, the agreement was simple, they would pay the mortgage cost as rent and I would handle major repairs. I checked the rent deposits, they were 3 months behind. Again, I remembered the last time I brought it up. It was at a barbecue in July. I had cornered my son by the grill. "We're a little tight right now, Dad," he had said, flipping a burger, avoiding my eyes. Emily needed to upgrade the nursery for the aesthetic. You know how she is, we'll catch up. I had nodded, I had let it go. I had let them eat my food and live in my house for free because I wanted to be the good dad. I navigated to the folder labeled Legal. I found the lease agreement. It was a standard month-to-month lease drafted by my attorney to protect the asset. I had never enforced the late fees. I had never sent a notice. I drafted an email to my attorney, Robert. Subject, notice to quit 42 Oak Street. Robert, please prepare a formal 30-day notice to quit for the tenants at 42 Oak Street due to non-payment of rent. I want it served by a process server. Do not email it. I want it taped to the door. I stared at the cursor blinking at the end of the sentence. Taped to the door. That meant the neighbors would see it. That meant the delivery driver would see it. That meant Emily, who curated her life for an audience of strangers, would have a neon sign of failure on her front porch. I pressed send. My finger didn't tremble. Next, the renovation. This was the big one. This was the leverage. Emily had spent the last 6 months planning a chef's kitchen overhaul. Italian marble, a commercial range, a knockdown wall to create an open concept flow. She had been posting about it on her social media nonstop. Dream kitchen demo day coming soon. The contractor, a man named Mike who I had known for 20 years, was scheduled to start demolition on Monday, 3 days from now. I was paying for it. It was supposed to be a gift for hosting Christmas this year. But Thanksgiving had made it clear I wasn't a guest, I was a prop, and props don't pay for marble countertops. I picked up my phone, I turned it on. It vibrated violently in my hand, a spasm of missed calls and texts. The screen lit up with notifications. 14 missed calls from my son. 6 missed calls from Emily. Text from my son, Dad, where are you? Text from Emily, this is incredibly childish, David. We need to talk. I ignored them all. I dialed Mike's number. He picked up on the second ring. David, I was just going over the lumber order. You ready for the dust next week? Hello, Mike, I said. My voice was steady, calm. I need to talk to you about the project at Oak Street. Yeah, what's up? Emily changed her mind on the backsplash again. Mike chuckled. He knew Emily. He charged a pain-in-the-neck tax for clients like her, and I usually paid it without complaint. No, I said. I'm canceling the contract. There was a silence on the line. I could hear the background noise of Mike's workshop, a saw buzzing in the distance. Canceling? Mike asked, his voice dropping. David, we're scheduled to demo on Monday. I've got guys lined up. I've got materials ordered. I know, Mike, and I apologize for the inconvenience. I will pay the cancellation fee and I will cover the cost of any materials you can't return. Send me the bill today. I'll wire the money immediately. Is everything okay? Mike asked. Did something happen to the house? The house is fine, I said, looking out at the ocean. The funding has dried up. Do not show up on Monday, Mike. Do not unlock the door. If they call you, tell them the client terminated the agreement. The client is you, David, Mike said slowly. Exactly, I said. Thanks, Mike. I hung up. I could feel the blood moving in my veins, hot and fast. It wasn't adrenaline, it was power. For years, I had handed them the bricks to build their castle. Now I was simply taking my bricks back. I spent the next 2 hours systematically cutting the cords. I called the insurance company. I removed the Lexus from my policy. They would get a notification in the mail that their coverage would lapse in 10 days. I logged into the cell phone provider. I transferred the billing responsibility for their lines to my son's account. If he didn't set up a payment method within 48 hours, the service would be suspended. I called the landscaping company that did their lawn. The lawn Emily needed to be pristine for her garden parties. I canceled the service effective immediately. By noon, the sun was high and blinding. I had stripped away the invisible infrastructure of their lives. I sat back in the chair, my back damp with sweat despite the air conditioning. I felt exhausted, drained, but clear-headed. I poured a glass of water and walked out to the balcony. I watched the waves crash against the shore over and over, relentless and indifferent. Then the phone rang in my hand. It was my son. I looked at the screen. I let it ring 4 times. I needed to control the pace of this conversation. I needed to be the rock, not the water. I slid my thumb across the screen. Hello, I said. Dad. His voice was high, tight. Panic radiated through the speaker. Dad, my God, are you okay? We've been calling for 24 hours. Emily thought you might have. I don't know, crashed the truck or had a heart attack. I'm fine, I said. I'm in Florida. Florida, he sounded bewildered. What? Why? When did you go to Florida? Yesterday, I said, after I left your driveway. Dad, look, he stammered. About yesterday, it was a miscommunication. Emily was just stressed about the hosting. She didn't mean to make you feel kicked out. She just wanted everything to be perfect for her parents. You know how intense they can be. I know how intense Emily can be, I corrected. She feels terrible, my son lied. I could hear the lie in the pitch of his voice. He had always been a terrible liar. She wants to apologize. We want you to come over for dinner next week. We can do a redo Thanksgiving, just us. That won't be necessary, I said. Dad, come on, don't be like this. We're family. Yes, I said, we are. And because we're family, I've been doing some thinking about your independence. What? I've been holding you back, I said, keeping my voice incredibly gentle. I've been crippling you with support. It's not healthy for a man your age to be so reliant on his father. Dad, what are you talking about? The panic was rising again. He sensed the shift in the atmosphere. He knew the tone of the business dad. I'm stepping back, I said. I'm letting you stand on your own 2 feet. I don't understand. You will, I said. You'll get some emails and letters in the next few days. It's all standard stuff. Just taking my name off things that should be in yours. Dad, he said, and his voice cracked. Dad, Mike the contractor called me 10 minutes ago. He said the kitchen is off. He said you canceled it. I did. But Emily, he whispered. The sheer terror of his wife's reaction leaked through the phone. She's already cleared out the cabinets. She's bought appliances. Dad, she's going to lose her mind. She promised her followers the reveal was coming in January. It sounds like an expensive project, I said. I hope you have the savings for it. You know we don't. That's $40,000. Then maybe you shouldn't be renovating a kitchen in a house you don't own, I said. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. What do you mean? The house, son, you're 3 months behind on rent. Dad, you never cared about the rent before. It's just money transferring between us. It's a lease, I said, and I'm a landlord who has been taken advantage of. I've sent the paperwork to Robert. You'll need to cure the default or vacate. Vacate, he screamed the word. You're evicting us, your own son, your grandchildren. I'm not evicting anyone yet, I said calmly. I'm asking you to pay your bills. That's what adults do. Adults who have aesthetic dinner parties where they exclude the people who pay for the roof over their heads. Silence, heavy, suffocating silence. She told you, he whispered. She told you not to come. She did, I said, and you stood there and let her. You walked me to the door. You handed me my coat. Dad, I have to live with her, he pleaded. It was a pathetic sound. You don't know what it's like when she's unhappy. She freezes me out. She makes life hell. I know exactly what it's like, I said. I walked out into the cold yesterday because of it. Now it's your turn to figure out how to keep her warm. Please, he said, don't do this. The kitchen, just the kitchen, please. If you cancel that, she'll leave me. I'm serious, Dad. This was the one thing holding her together right now. I closed my eyes. I pictured Emily. I pictured the way she looked at me when I suggested I bring a side dish, disgust, pity, annoyance. I pictured the closed door. If her love for you depends on a marble countertop, son, I said, then she's already gone. Oh, Dad, I have to go, I said. I'm going fishing. I'll be unreachable for a few weeks. Read the emails, handle your business. Dad, wait. I hung up. My hand was shaking now, not from fear, but from the adrenaline dump. It hurt. It physically hurt to hear the desperation in his voice. He was my boy. My instinct was to fix it, to write the check, to smooth the road. But I looked at the spreadsheet again. Lexus, country club renovation. They weren't necessities, they were costumes. They were costumes I had paid for, allowing them to play act at being successful while they treated me like the stagehand who needed to stay out of the spotlight. I powered down the phone again. I walked back out to the balcony. The sun was dipping lower now. The ocean was turning a deep, bruised purple. The anticipation of what was coming next settled in my stomach. I knew the sequence of events. First, the denial. Emily would think I was bluffing, then the rage. She would try to attack me, guilt me, shame me, then the reality when the credit card declines at the grocery store, when the process server tapes the notice to the front door, when Mike doesn't show up on Monday and the kitchen remains a hollowed-out shell of empty cabinets. I took a deep breath of the salt air. The planning was done. The first domino had been pushed. I went back inside and closed the laptop. I didn't need to look at the numbers anymore. I knew the math. For the first time in years, the ledger was balanced. The silence that followed hanging up on my son wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears, filled with the phantom echoes of things that should have been said 10 years ago but were swallowed for the sake of keeping the peace. I kept my phone off for 3 days. I spent those days in a strange fugue state. I fished off the pier, but I didn't bait the hook. I just stared at the gray, churning water of the Atlantic, watching the waves crash against the pylons, feeling the salt spray stiffen the skin on my face. My heart had a permanent, dull ache in it, a physical weight in the center of my chest that tightened every time I thought about my son's voice cracking on the phone. "Dad, please." That sound haunted me. It was the sound of a man who had been slowly hollowed out day by day, demand by demand, until there was nothing left but fear of the woman he slept next to. On the fourth day, a Tuesday, I turned the phone back on. The device vibrated so hard and for so long against the wooden table that it nearly walked itself over the edge. It buzzed continuously for 5 minutes as the backlog of notifications flooded in. 47 missed calls, 63 text messages, 12 voicemails. I didn't listen to them all. I didn't need to. I just scrolled through the transcripts, watching the evolution of Emily's psychological state play out in blue and gray bubbles. Tuesday 9:00 a.m. Emily. "This isn't funny, David. Mike just showed up and said he's pulling the crew because the check bounced. Fix this now." Tuesday 11:30 a.m. Emily. "I am standing in a kitchen with no floor and no cabinets. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? My mother is coming next week. Call me." Tuesday 2:45 p.m. My son. "Dad, please pick up. She's throwing things. She smashed the coffee maker. I don't know what to do." Wednesday 8:00 a.m. Emily. "You act like a child. You get your feelings hurt because you weren't invited to one dinner, so you destroy your son's life. You are a narcissist, a sad, lonely old man." Wednesday 4:00 p.m. My son. "The power company just sent a shut-off notice. The account was linked to your card. Dad, are you there?" Thursday 10:00 a.m. Emily. "We are coming there. You don't get to hide." I set the phone down. My hands were steady now. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They were coming here to my sanctuary. I looked around the small cabin. It wasn't much: exposed beams, a wood stove, a view of the dunes. It was the only property I owned that Emily had never tried to improve or update, mostly because she considered it a shack beneath her dignity. She hated the smell of the sea. She said it smelled like rot. I thought it smelled like life. I brewed a pot of coffee, strong and black, and sat on the porch. I waited. It took them 2 hours. I heard the car before I saw it. The Lexus SUV, the one I paid the lease on, came crunching up the graveled driveway. It was driving too fast. I watched as it bottomed out on a pothole, the undercarriage scraping violently against the rock. The car skid to a halt near the porch stairs. The engine died, ticking in the cool air. For a moment, nobody moved. The scene was almost picturesque, the luxury car gleaming against the backdrop of wild sea oats and gray sand. Then the driver's side door flew open. My son stepped out. He looked terrible. He was wearing the same clothes he'd had on when I dropped by for Thanksgiving, or at least the same expensive sweater, now wrinkled and stained. His eyes were red-rimmed, sunken into his face. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 72 hours. He looked like a ghost. Emily got out of the passenger side. If my son looked like a ghost, Emily looked like a demon trying to hold its human suit together. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a trench coat that was belted too tightly. Her hair, usually a perfect, chemically straightened curtain of blonde, was pulled back into a severe, messy bun. She slammed the car door. The sound cracked like a gunshot across the dunes. "You," she hissed, pointing a manicured finger at me as she marched up the steps. "You selfish, vindictive son of a bitch." I took a sip of my coffee. I didn't stand up. I stayed in the rocking chair, letting the wood creak beneath me. "Hello, Emily, son." "Don't you hello me." Emily screamed. Her voice was shrill, breaking the peace of the ocean breeze. She ripped her sunglasses off. Her eyes were wild, darting around, filled with a panic she was trying desperately to convert into rage. Do you know what you've done? Do you have any idea? I have a pretty good idea, I said calmly. I assume the renovation has stopped. Stopped, she laughed, a brittle, hysterical sound. Mike walked off the job. He left the demo debris in the middle of the room. There is a hole in the subfloor, David, a hole. And then I go to the grocery store to buy wine because I am losing my mind and the card declines in front of the neighbors. She stepped onto the porch, towering over me in her heels. Fix it, call the bank, call Mike right now. I looked at her, I really looked at her. For years, I had seen her as my son's wife, the mother of my grandchildren, a woman with expensive taste but a good heart deep down. I had made excuses for her snobbery. I had laughed off her passive-aggressive comments. But looking at her now, vibrating with entitlement, I saw the truth. She was a bottomless pit. She was a void that consumed comfort and money and joy, and no matter how much I threw in, it would never be enough to fill her. No, I said, the word hung in the air. Excuse me. Emily blinked as if I had spoken a language she didn't understand. No, I repeated. I won't call the bank, I won't call Mike. Those are your bills, Emily. That is your house, that is your renovation. But you pay for it, she shrieked. That's how this works. You have money, we are your family, you help us, that is the deal. The deal changed, I said. The deal changed on Thursday when I stood on your porch with a casserole in my hands and you told me I wasn't welcome at the table. Oh my God, she threw her hands up, spinning around to look at my son. Do you hear this? This is literally about the turkey. He is destroying our lives because he didn't get some dry turkey. My son stood at the bottom of the steps, looking at his shoes. He didn't say a word. It's not about the turkey, Emily, I said, my voice hardening. It's about respect. It's about the fact that I have spent 5 years financing a lifestyle you can't afford, buying you cars you don't need, and renovating a house that was perfectly fine, also you could impress people who don't care about you. And in return, I asked for nothing, just to be part of the family. I set my coffee cup down. But I'm not family to you, I continued, meeting her gaze. I'm an ATM, I'm a utility. And when a utility becomes inconvenient, like an old man at a young aesthetic dinner party, you shut it off. Well, Emily, I'm the one finding the off switch now. Emily's face turned a mottled shade of red. She took a step closer, invading my personal space. I could smell her perfume, something heavy and floral that cost $300 an ounce. You can't do this, she said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. We have kids, your grandchildren. You are going to let them live in a construction zone. I offered to pay for the kids, I said. I told my son, I will pay for their school, their clothes, their food, direct payments. But not a dime goes to you, not a dime goes to the house. The house is their home. The house, I said, is currently in default. Robert sent the notice yesterday. Since you missed the rent payment, which was just a formality to cover the taxes I pay, the lease is void. You have 30 days. Emily froze, the blood drained from her face, leaving her pale and waxen. You're evicting us. I'm reclaiming my property, I corrected. I'm going to sell it. The market is high. I think I'll use the money to travel, maybe buy a boat. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. The reality was finally hitting her. This wasn't a temper tantrum she could wait out. This wasn't a negotiation. The safety net she had been bouncing on for a decade was gone and she was in freefall. She turned to my son, do something. She screamed at him, say something, he is your father, he is making us homeless. My son looked up. He looked at me, then at her. He looked at the Lexus. Dad, he said, his voice was raspy. Yes, son. Is it real, he asked, the eviction? It's real, I said, unless you can come up with the back rent and sign a new lease at market value, which is about $4,000 a month. My son nodded slowly. He didn't look angry, he looked relieved, no, not relieved, resigned. He looked like a man who had been holding up a collapsing ceiling and finally decided to just let it fall. We can't afford that, he said softly. I know, I said. We can't afford any of it, he said, louder this time. He looked at Emily. We can't afford the cars, we can't afford the club, we can't afford the wine you drink. Oh, shut up, Emily hissed at him. Don't you dare side with him. I'm not siding with him. My son shouted, startling both of us. It was the first time I'd heard him raise his voice in years. I'm looking at the math, Em. It's over. The fantasy is over. I make 80,000 a year. You spend that in 4 months. Because I am building a life for us. She screamed back. I am building a brand. I am trying to give us status. I don't care about status. He roared. Tears were streaming down his face now. I care about sleeping at night. I care about not having panic attacks every time the mail comes. I wanted to invite him, Emily. I wanted my dad at dinner. You made me kick him out. He is toxic, she pointed at me. Look at what he's doing. He's the only reason we haven't been living in a one-bedroom apartment for the last 5 years. My son yelled. He was shaking. He paid for everything, and you treated him like garbage. Emily stared at him. The betrayal in her eyes was cold and absolute. She realized in that moment that she had lost control of him too. The narrative she had spun that they were a power couple held back by an interfering in-law had shattered. She straightened her coat. She wiped a smudge of mascara from under her eye. She composed herself, pulling the mask of superiority back on, though it was cracked and crooked now. Fine, she said. Her voice was ice. Fine. If you want to be a loser like your father, go ahead. But don't expect me to stick around for the poverty tour. She turned to me. You think you've taught me a lesson. You think I'm going to beg. I will take the kids. I will take everything I can carry, and you will never see them again. I will make sure they know exactly who made them homeless. I will poison them against you until they hate the sound of your name. It was a chilling threat. It was the threat I had feared the most. But as I looked at her, this woman who valued marble countertops over human connection, I realized something. Children aren't stupid. They see, they hear, they feel the tension in the house. You can try, I said softly. But eventually, Emily, the money runs out, the charm wears off, and people start to see the ledger. They see who was there and who was just using them. I leaned forward. And when that day comes, I'll be here, and I'll have the tuition checks ready, and I'll have a room for them, but you won't be in the picture. She stared at me for a long moment, hate radiating off her in waves. Then, without a word, she spun on her heel and marched back to the car. Get in, she screamed at my son. My son stood at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at the car, then back at me. He started. I can't go back there, Dad. I can't go back to that house with her. You don't have to, I said. There's a pull-out couch inside. There's fishing gear in the shed. We can get a lawyer on the phone tomorrow. He looked at Emily, sitting in the Lexus, revving the engine, pounding the steering wheel. She's going to take the kids to her mother's, he said. Probably, I agreed. And we will fight for custody. And we will win because you are their father and you have a job and you have a support system. And she has debt. My son took a deep breath. He exhaled and his shoulders dropped 3 inches. The tension of a decade seemed to flow out of him. He turned his back on the Lexus. I'll get my bag, he said. The sound of the Lexus horn was deafening. Emily laid on it, a long, continuous blare of rage. When she realized he wasn't turning around, she threw the car into reverse. Tires sprayed gravel everywhere, pelting the side of the cabin. She spun the wheel, fishtailed onto the main road and sped away, the engine whining in protest. Then silence returned. But it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the last few days. It was the quiet of the aftermath. The storm had broken. The damage was done, yes, but the air was clear. My son walked up the steps. He sat in the chair next to me. He put his head in his hands and he wept. He cried like a little boy, great heaving sobs of relief and grief and shame. I didn't say anything. I just reached out and put my hand on his shoulder, feeling the rough wool of his sweater. I let him cry. I looked out at the ocean. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden shadows across the water. I thought about the empty seat at the Thanksgiving table. I thought about the kitchen that would never be finished. I thought about the money I had saved and the money I had lost. I had lost a daughter-in-law. I had likely lost access to my grandchildren for a while until the courts sorted it out. I had lost the illusion that my family was happy. But as my son stopped crying and looked up at me, his eyes clear for the first time in years, I knew I had gained something too. I'm sorry, Dad, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I know, I said. I'm fishing at dawn, you coming? He wiped his face and nodded. Yes, yeah, I'm coming. I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold, but I drank it anyway. The ledger was balanced. The cost was high, higher than any check I had ever written. But looking at my son, free of the weight that had been crushing him, I knew it was worth every penny.